Welcome into the season finale of Cannabis Conversations. I am your fortunate and lucky host, Sean Welsh. I got to tell you guys and girls, I am so excited for today. I've been a podcaster in many different ways for about the last 5 years. And I'll tell you, this is one of my most exciting anticipated interviews that I've ever done because, well, I live in the great state of Wisconsin, and anyone who's watched the first couple episodes knows that I've been calling the great state of Wisconsin the island of prohibition. It's where I live. It's what I see around me. And we're joined today by Senator Melissa Agar. Melissa, how are you?
I'm doing well. It's good to be here.
Good. Thank you for being here, making the time. I know you're a busy woman, so we do appreciate it. Senator, can you give people a little bit of background into why cannabis legalization is so important to you, because you are the forefront, you are the leader, as I see it here in the state of Wisconsin. So we want to hear from you why that is.
Yeah, so when I was first elected to the legislature over a decade ago, I wasn't imagining that I would be known as the pot lady, as years ticked by, but here we are. And it really came from the fact that I knew that once I was elected, that it was vitally important that I spend a good deal of time out in the community listening to people and meeting them where they're at. And that meant sitting in coffee shops and going to taverns and having office hours in libraries and traveling around and making myself available for people to come and talk to about what was working and not working in the state of Wisconsin and affecting their lives and the lives of people who they loved. And it became really clear pretty early on, based on the stories that people were telling me, that the most dangerous thing about weed in Wisconsin is that it's illegal. And I knew that as a policymaker, I could engage myself in that conversation and work very hard to address and expand public safety for all the people in the state of Wisconsin. And that meant legalizing cannabis here in Wisconsin and taxing and regulating it in the same way that we tax and regulate alcohol. Think about over a decade ago when I engaged in these conversations, not many states had legalized cannabis for responsible adult usage. I think 2, actually, at that point in time. And here we are as the clock continues to tick with 24 states in the great nation who have legalized cannabis to tax and regulate in a similar way that we tax and regulate alcohol for responsible adult usage. And you're not alone. I will beat the drum and continue to say that we are literally an island of prohibition in Wisconsin now, where early on in this conversation, people said, oh, we'll never get to it in the Midwest. It's all going to be about what happens on the East and the West coasts. And Colorado is a little bit of an outlier. But we know that, quite frankly, prohibition is harming our agricultural heritage. It's harming our small family farms and the ability for them to expand into additional crops and additional profits. We know that cannabis prohibition is harming our main streets, that there are businesses out there that want to come to Wisconsin and open their doors and be on our main streets in our small towns and our big cities and in our villages and everywhere in between to be able to have good paying jobs and provide a product to people within those communities. We know that it is causing the cannabis prohibition in Wisconsin is causing undue harm to our local law enforcement agencies and the criminal justice system, because what people are engaging in here in Wisconsin is considered illegal, but what they're engaging in other states is considered legal. And there are only so many resources available to our law enforcement agencies to make sure that our communities are safe. If we can take cannabis off of that docket, our law enforcement agencies will be able to actually address domestic violence and gangs and stolen cars and people who are speeding on our highways and gun crimes, the real challenges and real harm to our communities that right now cannabis ends up being in the mix because it's their job to enforce the laws, not to make the laws.
That's true.
We know.
I will say to that point, it is difficult, as someone who lives here, right, to travel to other states, right, Melissa, that border us. and, you know, indulge and come back and have this like weird border fear that I just like, I don't feel like I should have to have at the age of 43 years old, that the second I cross the Wisconsin border, I'm followed by a Wisconsin patrol officer of where it doesn't matter. I know it's their job, but I still shouldn't have to feel like I've gone and done something crazy. But it's about that prohibition piece that really sticks with me, and sits there. So I want to ask you something though. You didn't think you'd be called the pot lady of justice here, as it were, trying to do this a decade ago, but I hear a lot of parents talk about how harmful this can be. And I know you're a mother of, is it four, Melissa, boys?
I have 4 sons. Yep.
Four sons. Can you speak to me a little bit from the parental side of this discussion? What motivates you as a parent of 4 boys to get this done, and potentially what fears other parents have that might be more between the ears than a reality, I guess is the nicest way to say it.
Well, I'm going to start out that conversation by saying that if you are a Black or brown person in the state of Wisconsin, or the parent of a Black or brown person in the state of Wisconsin, you know very clearly that cannabis prohibition is not working. There are egregious racial disparities when it comes to cannabis arrests. Simple possession, so not distribution, not open consumption, but simple possession in the state of Wisconsin, and that is absolutely, it's disgusting. Additionally, there is a false narrative out there that in states, that if you legalize weed, that we're going to have a real problem when it comes to youth usage. But we do know that in states that have legalized cannabis for responsible adult usage, that we do not see an increase in youth usage. And in fact, in the states that have been thoughtful about including provisions in their bill about education in our schools about cannabis and the effects of cannabis on your body, that kids are actually more likely to not engage in utilizing cannabis. So in the bill that I have authored, we do have those provisions where there would be educational opportunities for our communities and for our kids so that they can understand the importance of not engaging, right? We know that our kids' bodies are still developing up until they're roughly 26 years old, especially their brains. And it's important that they eat healthy food and they are not on their phones all the time, and that they're getting enough sleep and drinking enough water and not putting dangerous substances into their bodies. But people seem to be very fixated on cannabis. We're not talking to our kids about energy drinks or fast food or their phones in front of their faces, or the video games that they want to be on until late at night. It's a comprehensive conversation that we need to have with our kids. And in order for our kids to be as safe as possible, legalizing cannabis as opposed to having a prohibition of cannabis actually allows us to have those conversations, dialogues, and expectations of the young people in our communities. We also have the ability to address racial disparities in the state of Wisconsin. We are the state that it is the most dangerous to raise a young Black child in. And doing nothing about that is not acceptable. Well, I realize that legalizing cannabis isn't going to address all of those issues. It will address some of those issues.
The social justice side is huge for me. I came into the cannabis market in Colorado in 2003, 2004. So I watched the evolution of it from medical, myself as a medical grower, watching that happen. And that was part of a community, right? So when you're a medical grower, this was back before you had to tag everything seed to sale. I mean, when legalization comes in, governments come in, oversight comes in, I get it. I'm cool. I'm a capitalist at heart, so I totally do understand it. However, it was about the community. It was about that social justice piece that stood out to me that I think a lot of states miss. Melissa, why do you think that the states who haven't legalized yet, why aren't they using and looking at framework that exists in states that are successful and just mocking it? Why does every state feel like they have to reinvent the wheel on this?
Well, I can't talk to you about what other states are doing, but what I can tell you about is the journey and the path that I have been on in Wisconsin. Again, I started this over a decade ago. There were not many states that had introduced legislation for responsible adult use policy. And this bill has really been driven by and influenced by the people of the state of Wisconsin, whether it's the farmers here or people who have been impacted by the injustice of our criminal justice system, or addiction doctors, or entrepreneurs. The list goes on and on. I've had thousands and thousands of conversations with people over the years. And making sure that we are addressing the fears that people have about cannabis legalization, as well as the dreams and the possibilities, and flanked with the harm of prohibition. And that's why we have the bill that we have. We do have major provisions in this legislation that address social justice, that address expungement of crimes, that if this bill was passed, and there were people that had records on the books for engaging in cannabis-related activities, but because the bill is passed, they would not have received citations or punishments. Automatically removed from records for nonviolent misdemeanor-related offenses with the bill as drafted. Larger offenses would have paths for people to petition for expungement. We also know with this bill that it's vitally important that people who have records on the books for being engaged in cannabis-related activities, in some states, they prevent people from being involved in the industry or being able to work in a dispensary or to have a grow operation. In my bill, we do not prevent them. We actually encourage them. We also have a big chunk of the revenue that would be created by collecting taxes and fees related to cannabis legalization in Wisconsin, going back into communities that have been most harmed by prohibition, social equity, social justice provisions. So different communities certainly prioritize different aspects of legalization. And based on what it is that I've heard from people, whether it's impaired driving, the impacts on criminal justice reforms, the impacts on our agricultural heritage, I have taken all of those thoughts and concerns to heart, and I have done my very best to make sure that we're weaving them together and making sure that Wisconsin is more safe, more prosperous, and that people's personal liberties and freedoms are more protected.
I ask a great question, you give a great answer. I appreciate that, because at the end of the day, it is about getting it right for your state, doing the right thing. You've been working on this a long time. A decade is no short feat, but it is the voice of the Wisconsin people, right, Melissa, that want this. I mean, I think the last poll I saw was darn near 70%, right, of the Wisconsin public are looking for this. There has been a new bill, not yours, introduced by the Republican Party. I think is the fairest way to say it here. Maybe not, but have you looked at it, and what are your thoughts?
So every session, there's a number of different cannabis-related bills that are brought forward. Most recently in Wisconsin, there was a bill brought forward by Republicans in the state assembly that would create a pill bill, a highly restrictive medicinal cannabis policy here in the state of Wisconsin. And this bill isn't going to go anywhere for a number of reasons. One of the reasons why this bill isn't going to go anywhere is that the Republicans in the Wisconsin State Assembly didn't even engage with their colleagues in the Wisconsin State Senate from the Republican Party to draft a piece of legislation that all Republicans or the majority of Republicans in the legislature could get behind. And the Republicans in the state Senate are really uncomfortable with a number of the provisions that were put in this bill, and also concerned with the lack of provisions that were put in this piece of legislation. So at the end of the day, it is really clear that this was a bill that was brought forward by Speaker Robin Voss in the Wisconsin State Assembly, meant to be smoke and mirrors, distraction for the people of Wisconsin to think that Republicans actually care about cannabis policy. If they actually cared about cannabis policy, they would put thought behind it, and they would make sure that they're listening to their bosses, the good people of the state of Wisconsin, about what it is that they want and they don't want. Even Republicans in the Wisconsin State Senate know how out of touch Speaker Voss is, and are not getting behind this piece of legislation.
And they shouldn't. You know, when I first read it, I was appalled. The idea of state-owned dispensaries is an absolute joke. Okay, like someone called it the DMV or whatever it was. I want no part of that. But you talked about a bigger aspect for me that I think is important, is the entrepreneurial side, right? I'm a decade-old entrepreneur. I've been in the cannabis space a long time. I run a totally different business for a living, but it's my hobby. And I'll tell you that when we talk about what it looks like to be an entrepreneur, at one time, Melissa, I think last year, maybe there was an article that come out of Milwaukee about the dollar amount that had been gone to other states, right? It was like some ridiculous number, 250 million, whatever it was. And I kept thinking to myself, everyone's talking about the tax revenue, all these other things, but what about the income of businesses? What about the local taxation or the ability to create a business that gives jobs, how do we, how do you look at that as an encompassing number and still think this is a good idea? Melissa, should I laugh, feel bad, or just be upset the fact that one side of the Republican Party isn't talking to the other about a bill they want to put forward? Is that kind of standard politics, or am I missing something?
Well, I'm not in the rooms with them. I'm not invited in.
Truly, they wouldn't invite you in the room for whatever reason to get it right. So I get that.
But at the end of the day, I think it just shows the disarray that exists right now, and the real hope that we have in Wisconsin to be able to get things right moving forward into 2024 and 2025. We know that in Wisconsin, and this is going to get a little into the weeds, a little minutia, a peek behind the curtain, so to speak. But the Wisconsin Supreme Court is looking at how it is that people in Wisconsin are represented by their legislators and how those legislators get the districts that they represent people in. And it's been decided by the Supreme Court that the districts that people represent here in the state of Wisconsin are very gerrymandered. That means they're puzzle pieced together in a way that the majority party, Republicans in Wisconsin, are able to choose who they represent, as opposed to allowing the voters to choose who represents them. That creates a lack of balance. There's no equilibrium. And when there is a lack of equilibrium, it means that the politicians, the elected officials, don't need to be accountable or listen to the good people of the state that they work for. And here in Wisconsin, as you pointed out, nearly 2/3 of the people in Wisconsin want responsible adult use policy. Anyone who's ever run for office before knows that that is an overwhelming mandate of people in the community. It's our job to listen to them. And it is, a strikeout for the Republican Party of Wisconsin to engage in these games. I think people in Wisconsin are catching up, and they realize that when Speaker Voss put this bill out with his colleagues in the state assembly, that he was doing it to win political points, to score political points, as opposed to do the right thing for the people of our state. 2024 is going to be an interesting time for people in Wisconsin because of the big presidential election and also having new ungerrymandered maps that our legislature will run on. And I am hopeful that in the 2025-2026 legislative session, that a number of policies, including cannabis policy, is going to be addressed in a much more pragmatic way, and that we're going to either cross the finish line or get much closer to crossing the finish line than what we have before. Because folks, the genie's out of the bottle. It's not a matter of if this is going to happen, it's a matter of when it's going to happen. And it's vitally important that we get it right. Too many people are counting on us to get it right. And we can't go forward with half measures and half truths. We need to make sure that we're addressing the real needs and the concerns of the people of our community.
Half measures, a great way to say that, because at the end of the day, politically speaking, I just live here. I try not to get too crazy in politics. I follow you like crazy because I'm behind what you're trying to do. I wonder though, and again, I'm a novice. I don't know the answer to this, but we have a governor who is behind such an idea as yours. I've had a lot of people come to me and say, Sean, why doesn't your governor do something? I don't have an answer. I'm not a politician. Melissa, is there something, I know that we're all on the same team here, Democrats, but is there something that can be done or could be done from that seat that isn't, or is it not that cut and dry?
So I am not the governor of the state of Wisconsin, and I am grateful every day that we have the governor that we have. Governors are the people who get to decide whether a bill becomes a law or not after it goes through the legislative process. Governor Evers supports cannabis reform in the state of Wisconsin. He's on the record in multiple budgets of putting adult legalization, responsible adult use policy in his budget, and the Republicans have stripped it out. He has also signaled that if there was a do no harm, do good policy in regards to medicinal cannabis, that he would support that. But we haven't gotten there yet. So it is important for us. And I encourage everyone to go back and YouTube How a Bill Becomes a Law, Schoolhouse Rock. Many of us grew up watching that process, but that idea or that bill needs to move through both houses of the legislature before it even can get to the governor's desk. The governor can nibble around the edges, but he cannot change the laws in the state of Wisconsin without legislative action.
See, that's why I ask. I'm glad to have someone who has the answers instead of me just saying, look, guys, I don't have the answer, do you? But so when you look at it from your perspective, when you think about the future, and obviously the maps is a big deal, right? the redrawing of all of that. What do you think is going to be the tipping point, Melissa? From your opinion, what gets this done? Obviously, the voice of the people has been one part of it. Hasn't been enough, though. Is the maps the answer, in your opinion?
Well, certainly listening to the good people of the state of Wisconsin and lifting their voices up and making sure that their values are being represented in the Capitol building is vitally important. But if we have legislators who are not listening to the voices of the people in the state of Wisconsin, they're not being held accountable because their districts are so packed or gerrymandered, there is a real problem. And I am hopeful that with new legislative maps, that cannabis legalization, as well as many other issues that the vast majority of people in Wisconsin want addressed, will be able to move forward once we do have those new maps, which will be in 2024. Cannabis legalization is on a list of pretty big topics that people in Wisconsin want us to address. And I know we're here to talk about cannabis policy on this podcast, but the vast majority of people in Wisconsin want us to expand healthcare access. They want to make sure that the water we drink is clean and is not going to poison us, and that the air we're breathing is not toxic, and that we're protecting our public lands, and that the fish we catch with our children when we go fishing are fish that they can learn how to take off the hook and clean and cook and then eat themselves. That we're fully funding our schools and making sure that our snowplow drivers have the equipment to keep our roads clean in the winter. And unfortunately, all of those are concerns that are not moving through the legislature because of this partisan gridlock. So I do remain very hopeful. And it's not just that people in Wisconsin are picking on folks who want cannabis policy reform. I mentioned that other list of things, whether or not you agree or don't agree with all of them, they are issues that over 70% and sometimes upwards of 80% of the people in Wisconsin want us to move forward on those. And that ultimately, the fact that all of those things are gridlocked here in Wisconsin shows that our government is not working on the behalf of the people, and that needs to be unlog jammed. And that's what we're going to see through having new legislative maps and higher accountability of lawmakers here in the state of Wisconsin. There is an old phrase out there that is, if you can't change the minds of your elected officials, you need to change their faces. And we have the opportunity right now in Wisconsin to make sure that our legislature matches the values and the hopes and the dreams of the people of Wisconsin. And that means legalizing cannabis for responsible adult usage, taxing and regulating like we do alcohol, and ensuring that we're increasing prosperity and opportunity for people in the state of Wisconsin, at the same time increasing public safety and bringing in tax revenue so that we're able to address other ills and concerns in our communities that we can't because tax dollars are limited.
So we've a couple things there. I mean, obviously, you talk about all the things that the state of Wisconsin's after is important, right? I've been hearing a lot about cannabis and women's rights. That's what goes on in my circle. I'm in my 40s. I don't have kids, but I have a lot of friends with kids, and that's been the two biggest discussion points that I've heard with healthcare. Just general healthcare behind that. So I agree with you 100% there. With that, public safety is something that I think always comes up when it talks about cannabis, Melissa. I know in Colorado, I used to sit in local meetings and people would be concerned about a dispensary by a school, or they would be just, how close it was to the children's YMCA, whatever the case was. And I know that we had looked at it and we said, okay, but I'd go on those same maps. I'd say, what about these liquor stores? Or what about this? What about that? As you see Wisconsin kind of moving forward, do you have a vision for how you see the actual sale, the actual people being involved in it, like the number of dispensaries? Like, do you go that far down, or are you just like, look, I got to first worry about a bill and then I can worry about the infrastructure of that?
Well, very much in the same way that the state doesn't regulate for municipalities and counties how many liquor stores or churches that they have. We in this bill don't do that as well. We allow local governments to have that local control and very much hope that they would have review boards and zoning conversations about how many dispensaries there would be within their communities. In the bill, we do provide some parameters of protections for communities, the distance in the same way that, we do with other instances, distances from schools, or daycare centers, whether or not people can put where they can put signage, what is included in that signage, what types of disclosures needs to be on it. Again, education for young people within our schools about utilizing cannabis, funds to help train law enforcement officers in detecting impairment so that it's not depending on a blood test that has nothing to do with impairment. It has to do with usage potentially 28 days ago, in the way some bodies metabolize it. So overarching protections and parameters are included in the bill, but most of the direct decisions and conversations about placement and quantity would be left up to the local government.
Free market as far as that's concerned, right? And I'm a huge fan of that. I think it offers a lot of opportunities, and obviously, permit systems can get weird and it can be about, localized. I'm sure that you're looking at it from the social justice aspect. I imagine that plays into the permit part of the game as well for you. But talk to me about two things I want to get your opinion on. One, you live in Dane County. Dane County is decriminalized. I think we have a lot of people watching our show who are consumers. And I think they think that means that it is legal or that they can go to a dispensary because, Melissa, I'm sure you've seen this, but an issue we're having is these people putting out the Delta 9 and talking about legal THC. I got to tell you, I don't like it. I think it's all very bad look because I think it gives a very bad misconception. Where do you stand on decriminalization as a step forward for the state? And then follow that up with where you stand on some of the stuff that's going on with the Delta 9. Delta 8.
Yeah, so decriminalization is a difficult conversation. At the end of the day, what you're doing is decriminalizing for the end user, but whoever is out there selling the product can still get really harmed by the prohibition of cannabis in our communities. So the consumer is more protected with decriminalization than the manufacturer and the distributor, and that to me is very concerning and opens doors for certain communities to be more harmed. Additionally, because it continues to be illegal, it does allow the opportunity for law enforcement to decide that they're going to engage with someone with something that's not a cannabis-related offense, but move into a cannabis-related offense, and it can escalate pretty quickly. I think it's vitally important that we legalize rather than just decriminalize, and that we legalize for responsible adult usage with a medicinal component, so that we can address the harm that's been done to so many people within our communities. Additionally, we do have dispensaries that are open all across the state of Wisconsin, and I've had the opportunity to meet with hemp farmers, the people that are growing hemp cannabis in Wisconsin, as well as manufacturers and producers of hemp cannabis products in Wisconsin, and then many of the dispensaries that are selling those products. And most of them are saying, we would like to be more regulated. We would like more laws and more parameters so that we can make sure that our consumers trust us, and that they know that they're coming into the best possible shop. We know also that some shops are very careful about what it is that they're selling and vetting the products there, but there are other ones out there that are considered more of a head shop, where they aren't digging into, they're just providing access to different products. And because of the prohibition in our state of Wisconsin, but also the Farm Bill at the federal level, we have this weird limbo in the state of Wisconsin where there is a lack of clarity about what is legal and not legal, and what is safe and not safe, and who do you prevent walking through your door? Is it 18-year-olds or people under the age of 21 or 16-year-olds? And what conversations do you have with people? How do you educate them? And who's working behind the counter? Have they been educated in the similar way that bartenders in Wisconsin have to get licensed? Under my bill, the bud tenders would have to get licensed. They would have to go through some sort of educational program, because they are front and center with people that are walking in, and people are expecting that that person behind the counter has some sort of expertise. But right now in Wisconsin, there's no protections or guarantee that that person has any sort of expertise.
I think, like you said, loopholes. The Farm Bill loophole is interesting. I just walked into a major Wisconsin grocer yesterday and was in the cannabis beverage section of this large grocer, and I thought to myself, I looked at my wife, I took a can off, I said, "What is this? You know, how does this, and you've got the whole leaf on there and it's this kind of imagery and you're like, wow, this is real THC. You turn it around, it's not. You're glad to see that, but it's an interesting loophole to allow this sort of next step or these legalized dispensaries. I mean, look, at least we don't have the problem New York has, but that brings me to my next question, Melissa. Have you gone to other states and toured? Have you talked to other peers of yours in other states to kind of come together with this? What's gone into your research, Melissa?
Yeah, so I've had the opportunity to talk with legislators from many other states along the road, as well as with people who live in other states that have legalized. And it's interesting. One of the people that I spoke with was in a state that had voted to legalize cannabis. Well, not voted. It was actually a state that had legalized cannabis through referendum, and it was a lawmaker who was outspokenly against that. But after they legalized cannabis through referendum, they were able to see how they were able to provide more protections for people within their communities, and were remorseful about the fact that they were prohibitionist and now were a leader in their community in regards to legalization and education, and coming up with the guardrails to make sure that their state and the people in their state were safer. Had the opportunity most recently to sit down with legislators in Minnesota. They were the last Midwestern state to legalize cannabis, and to talk to them about their process and how the people of their community, as well as advocacy groups and lawmakers, were able to sit down at tables and address many of the concerns that people have with legalizing. And people were really quick to understand that actually by legalizing, you're able to address those public safety concerns that so many people have had. When I travel, if I'm in a legal state, I will find a dispensary and I will go and visit it and see what is it like to go in there? How many times are they asking me for my ID? What sort of queue do I have to go through? What are the conversations like at the counter? And also talk to people that are there consuming. And oftentimes when you, especially in the Midwest, you're going to legal states, you see an awful lot of cars with Wisconsin license plates on them. So it's clear that Wisconsinites are taking their hard-earned tax dollars and spending their very valuable time to travel to other states to purchase legal cannabis in those states, even though there is a fear that when traveling back to the state of Wisconsin that they could be prosecuted. Because certainly they could buy it on the illicit market here in Wisconsin. We have a super successful illicit market here in the state of Wisconsin, but many Wisconsinites know that with regulation comes additional safety and protections. And that's why they are paying extra money in taxes to other states and spending their time to go to those states to purchase product that has gone through that regulatory process.
Yeah, the illicit market, I think, is also what keeps people out of it, right? So like my folks, they live in Illinois and they've been, you know, they've like had their cannabis beverage or they've dabbled in these like what edibles, whatever, right? And it's so funny to me because they're the same people who, you know, found the 16-year-old stash and burned it and threw out all the pie, all this other stuff. But now they're here. And my dad, I was like, Dad, what's the deal? You know, like, how could you even do this? He's like, dude, it's not illegal. I don't have the fear of being in trouble. And so now I can go and enjoy. And I thought to myself, okay, all right, I like that. I like that. And I think it does it for a lot of people to bring down that barrier of, you know, people, when we were the DARE program, Melissa, okay? That's what I was raised on. The DARE program, I think, made me do drugs because I was like, look, I don't get it. I don't think you guys are pushing this the right way. But when it comes to kids, and it comes to that, my folks had always said to me, look, when you're 18, it's going to be your decision. You'll make that decision as you will. Most legal use states are 21, which seems more than fair to me. But I want to circle back to Minnesota real fast. Correct me if I'm wrong. I thought I read they did something very interesting post-legalization because they didn't have dispensaries, but that the local tribes had been growing and had their own dispensaries, and they allowed their people to, you know, the citizens, if you will, to go on there and kind of buy without hassle. Have you heard this? Do I have any of that right?
So yeah, Minnesota is an interesting state right now to study when it comes to cannabis reform and the steps they're going forward with. So originally they were a very restrictive medicinal state. Well, it wasn't state-run dispensaries. It was very pill-based, very pharmaceutical-based. It became very clear to folks in Minnesota that that wasn't the appetite of what people in their communities wanted. So they started working on full legalization, and their legislature their governor and advocates had been working for quite some time in order to get it across the finish line. There was a bill that came up in Minnesota a couple of years ago where someone offered an amendment and it passed. And it's pretty clear that members of the legislature didn't know what they were voting on, because lo and behold, all of a sudden Minnesota was full recreational legal as long as it wasn't plant-based. So edibles, salves, tinctures, and beverages were legal, but plant was not.
Wait, you can't get to any of that stuff without the plant. I don't understand. It doesn't just magically appear. But all right, I get what you mean. No actual grass. I understand. No,
right. No bud.
No
you
flower.
couldn't buy the bud, but you could buy the terpenes if they were turned into a product. Shortly after that, the legislature was able to cross the finish line with a responsible adult use full policy that will be implemented. There will be dispensaries in Minnesota that will have plant-based plant products available. But right now, there are dispensaries all across Minnesota that are selling edibles and beverages and salves, tinctures. However, there is a tribal nation in Minnesota called the Red Cliff, and they were ahead of the curve because they are on sovereign land. They were able to sell plant-based cannabis, the bud, the plant, on their reservation, on their property, on their sovereign land. And non-native folks, people from not just Minnesota, but the Dakotas and probably other states as well, destination to this small reservation to purchase to purchase the bud. Even though there are dispensaries where they're able to get the beverages and the infused products. We know that people want that choice, right? They want to be able to have the bud, the plant itself, as well as to have these products where it's infused and put into it. And that the Red Cliff, my understanding is for many days, many weeks, they were selling out because so many people were going there to purchase after it was legalized in Minnesota. I believe that we will see in 2025 dispensaries opening up in Minnesota that are selling bud as well. But until then, the good people of Minnesota do have access to edibles, tinctures, and beverages in dispensaries, and they're making tax dollars on those sales.
Well, let me ask you this then: what have you had discussions with our tribes, with sovereign land here in the state of Wisconsin, and what is their opinions and how do they view this sort of discussion moving forward?
Yeah, so we have a number of tribal nations here in Wisconsin. They're all very independent from each other, but they are connected in a lot of the advocacy work that they do. I have had the opportunity to talk to people from many of the different tribal nations in Wisconsin, and it is clear that there's diverse opinions, as there are diverse opinions of individuals in Wisconsin, but the majority of them believe that prohibition is not working. I will point out that the Red Cliff in Minnesota did not start selling plant-based bud products until after Minnesota legal. So that is something that we haven't done in Wisconsin, and one of the hurdles that we need to overcome, so that our sovereign nations in Wisconsin can also benefit from legalization, as they should.
Yeah, they should. It should be a bigger deal for sure, because again, I mean, I was reading an article about North Carolina has some, tribes down there that are like, look, if you're not going to get behind it, we're going to try and figure out a way we can get behind it and try to push this message and do more with it. So everyone is trying to be a part of it. Melissa, where do you fall? And again, I haven't gone through the tooth and comb of the bill. Where do you stand on the home grow side of things? I know it's been a big debate for people. Should they be allowed to? I have family here in the state of Wisconsin that is in agricultural, and they have told me that we have some of the best soil in the country, right? Some of the best places to grow actual anything is here. How do you feel about the home grow situation?
Yeah, so I support it, and included in my bill certainly is the farming and cultivation at the commercial level, and there's processes for people to get licensed to be able to grow at the commercial level. But also in the bill is the ability for people to have access to home grow. We know that there are some people that are very good at growing plants, and this is something that they would like to have access to. And in small quantities for personal consumption, I absolutely believe that folks in Wisconsin should have that opportunity as well.
mean, we got Wisconsin. We got a lot of green thumbs around here. We see it all the time, right? Our summer gardens. We have garden, community gardens everywhere. We're all about that part of it. And I think it is a missing part of the discussion. Melissa, you've been awesome with your time. I want to wrap this up, and I'm going to go big. I'm going to go overarching here. I'm going to have some fun. Talk to me about Melissa's thoughts on the federal part of this game, Melissa. I know you're not at the federal level. I know you're a state representative, but federally speaking, in this season, we've had people say absolutely never going to happen, might happen in 20 years. Seems a lot of people think it's never going to happen. You're in the game. What is your feedback?
It's going to happen at some point. And I really do appreciate the fact that Joe Biden has grown in his thoughts when it comes to cannabis here in the United States. Even as much as 4 years ago, he really leaned much more into the prohibitionist mindset. But he is working hard at the federal level to have cannabis reclassified and for people that have been hurt by our federal laws when it comes to nonviolent cannabis offenses, for people to have expungement there as well, and encouraging governors to look into what actions that they can take in their states. That type of leadership and growth is vitally important, and we need more of that, where lawmakers realize that the opinion that they have today doesn't need to continue to be that same opinion, that we can change our minds based on new information that's out there. I think very much like many other policies that at one point in time, and it could be sooner than later, that cannabis will be legalized at the federal level. Do I think that...
You heard it from someone who's in the game here, people. This isn't just other, talking heads. This is somebody close to the deal with that. On that point, though, you did talk about the scheduling, Melissa. There's obviously a lot of concern right now. What's going to happen? The DEA is getting ready to roll out their thoughts after a bunch. My gosh, reading through those redacted documents just gives me a headache. But I did it to the most part. And I'm wondering, from where you sit, do you have an opinion on scheduling declassification? Because it seems that, again, on this show, everyone's really concerned about Schedule III, because it sounds like big pharma takes over and small business entrepreneurs get pushed out. Initially is the fear. Any thoughts from you?
Well, certainly having it on Schedule I, as you pointed out, doesn't work with the DARE program and how it is that many of our kids are being educated, right? Like having cannabis plant next to heroin and fentanyl and cocaine and other things that people literally die from on a daily basis is not working. And I do think that rescheduling in this conversation is important. I am not a supporter of pharmaceutical only when it comes to cannabis. And that's one of the reasons why I very much support the bill that we've been working on in Wisconsin for over a decade, because it's clearly the people's bill. It's something, my name is the lead author on it, but ultimately it's because of the trust that people have instilled in me and the conversations and time that they have spent sharing their stories that we're able to have this bill. We need to make sure that we're putting forward policy that supports our small businesses, our main streets, and entrepreneurs, not one that is supporting major pharma or big industry to be able to come in and take the conversation. We're gritty here in the state of Wisconsin. We support one another. We're a state that has a history of baking casseroles for one another and walking each other's dogs and picking each other's kids up from school and getting mail for our neighbors when they're on vacation. And I would like to see policy here that supports that compassion and neighborhoodliness that we have in our bill. And ultimately, the devil's in the details with all policymaking. I would hope at the federal level that they would take into consideration how it is that we support our main streets and our mom and pop shops and our small farmers. And I can only do what I can at that level and continue to advocate with my congressional delegation.
Unbelievable answer. Thank you so much for just, again, the enlightenment there. I love to hear it. Last question. We're going to let you go here. What can people in the great state of Wisconsin do, Melissa, to support your bill, to do more with their politics? What can we be doing as people to help push this discussion forward? And I'm going to say, before you answer, I'm going to say, young people, please get out and vote. Just in general, like, it has been a huge discussion point on my show for the last 15 episodes. We need our youth to vote. Melissa, what can we do here in the state of Wisconsin to help you move things forward?
Well, as you pointed out, voting your values is vitally important. Don't just make an assumption that someone's a Democrat or a Republican and decide that you're going to vote for them. Do your homework. And we know that young people, we talked about 70% of people in Wisconsin want cannabis reform. When you break that number down into people under the age of 30, it's exponentially larger. This is a real issue. And as you said, healthcare rights, whether it's abortion or LGBTQ healthcare, fall into that same category. addressing gun violence, et cetera. Young people want us to make sure that the world that they are living in is one that matches their values. So voting your values, do your homework. If your elected official doesn't match your values, consider running for office. Supporting someone who's running for office that matches your values during the very important 2024 election cycle is another way. But also, we are, continuing to beat the drum and encourage public hearings and forward momentum. So there's a petition on my legislative website. If you go to Senator Melissa Agar on Google, you'll find our legislative website. You can sign the petition. You can share it with other people. And most of all, dispel the myths. There are so many myths out there, prohibitionists and reefer madness based myths that are really, they need to be debunked. And having thoughtful conversations with folks, not scary conversations, not in your face conversations, but real thoughtful conversations about the truth of cannabis and the harms of prohibition will help us continue to move forward. The conversations have changed drastically over the last 10 years, where people used to come up to me and say, I like that stuff you're working on, keep it up. And now, literally in grocery store aisles and on playgrounds where kids are playing, people are like, when are we going to reform cannabis policy in Wisconsin? So we have changed the dialogue, and we need to continue leaning in because it's going to happen.
Well, that is awesome. Thank you so much for your time. It has been absolutely outstanding. This is the way we wanted to close our season. So thank you. Everyone, go out and find that link. I am already signed up on the petition. I have shared it with others. I can encourage everyone in the state of Wisconsin to get behind that. Melissa, thank you so much for your time. You have been outstanding. And if there's anything we could ever do to help the cause, please let us know.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's great. All right, everyone. That wraps up season 1. We had a ton of fun. Thank you so much for the support. But remember, the point of this show is to put this plant in its rightful place in society. It does not deserve the stigma. We all need to do better. We hope this show helps in a little way. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next season.